Laudetur Jesus Christus. Vatican and World News.
In the headlines this Wednesday, July 6th, in the wake of the Chicago suburb shootings, Cardinal Cupich calls for weapons of war to be removed from the streets. Pope Francis to name women to the Vatican's dicastery for bishops. And more migrants die in the Mediterranean. In the Vatican, I'm Deborah Castellano-Lubov. In the third part of his interview with the Reuters news agency, Pope Francis shared his plans to expand the role of women in the Roman Curia and announced his intention to appoint 2 women to the dicastery that assists the pontiff in the selection of bishops. Christopher Wells has the latest.
Pope Francis has announced his intention to appoint 2 women to the dicastery of bishops, who will therefore be involved in the process of choosing new bishops. The Pope made the remarks in his interview with Reuters senior correspondent Philip Pulela in response to questions about the presence of women in the Vatican, the new apostolic constitution Predicate Evangelium, which reforms the Curia, and about which dicasteries or Vatican offices could be entrusted to laymen or laywomen in the future. I am open should an opportunity arise, the Pope said. Right now, the governorate has a deputy governor, and now 2 women will be going to the Congregation of Bishops on the commission to elect bishops, he said. And he continued, in this way, things open up a little bit. Pope Francis then added that in the future, he does see the possibility of lay people being appointed to lead certain Vatican departments, such as the Dicastery for Laity, Family, and Life, or the Dicastery for Culture and Education, or the Vatican Apostolic Library. The Holy Father recalled that last year he appointed Sister Raffaella Petrini to the number 2 position in the Vatican City Governorate, making her the first woman to hold that position. Pope Francis had also appointed Sister Natalie Beckhart, a French member of the Xavier Missionary Sisters, as Undersecretary of the Synod of Bishops, while several other women already hold high-level positions in the Vatican, including Barbara Jatta, the first female director of the Vatican Museums, and Christiane Murray, the Deputy Director of the Vatican Press Office. Both were appointed by the current Pope. Last month, Cardinal Kevin Farrell, the prefect of the Dicastery for Laity, Family, and Life, joked that with the promulgation of the new constitution on the Curia, he could be the last cleric to lead that dicastery. I'm Christopher Wells.
Staying with the Holy Father, Pope Francis has given extra insight into his personal life in an interview granted to the Argentinian priest Guillermo Marco, who was the head of the press office of the Archdiocese of Buenos Aires for 10 years while Bergoglio was Archbishop. Pope Francis spoke about his life of prayer, crisis management, and his experience of living outside of his native Argentina. Father Benedict Mayaki reports.
Describing himself, Pope Francis said, "My heart is a warehouse. It is full of things I keep. I have to expand the shelves all the time, and in this, I'm a bit of a collector in the good sense of the word, as I don't want to lose any of the good things that people give me." The Holy Father said these words in an interview granted to Argentinian priest Guillermo Marco on Sunday. Father Marco, who was in charge of the press office of the Archbishopric of Buenos Aires when Bergoglio was Archbishop, published part of the interview in Marco tu Semana de la Tele a las Redes, a podcast produced by the priest. The conversation focused on more personal questions about the Pope, his spiritual life, and his time away from his native Argentina. Talking about his life of prayer, the Pope noted that the prayer of a bishop is to take care of his flock, and the Pope is a bishop. Hence, his prayer is to ask for, to intercede, to give thanks for all the good that is done. Pope Francis also said that he wakes up early to pray because it is easy to get carried away when activities of the day begin. Reflecting on his life in Buenos Aires, Pope Francis recalled that he was always either walking or taking a bus. Here in Rome, rather, he said that the 2 times he tried to go out, he was noticed by people and even members of the press. Regarding his spiritual state before his mission at the head of the church, the Pope said that the Holy Spirit gives you many gifts, but no one ever talks about the things that make you numb. And sometimes you feel you are numb in the face of situations that should make you suffer greatly and make you move without missing the opportunity. Another topic discussed in the interview was crisis management. Pope Francis noted that one of the things he has learned is that we do not know how to manage crisis, even though crises are what make us grow. When you transform a crisis into conflict, you lose, the Pope said. Unity is greater than conflict, and in other words, conflict diminishes you. Finally, reflecting on the cycle of catechesis on the elderly, which Pope Francis began on the 23rd of February, Father Marco wanted to know how the Pope faces this stage of life. At this age, the Pope said, I laugh at myself and move on. I'm Father Benedict Mayaki.
Turning to the United States, Pope Francis sent a telegram on Tuesday addressed to Cardinal Blaise Cupich, the Archbishop of Chicago, expressing his sadness at the latest deadly shooting in the U.S. during a 4th of July parade on Monday. The Pope prayed that every member of society reject violence in all of its forms and respect life in all of its stages. 6 people were killed and more than 30 injured when a gunman started shooting into a crowd gathered for the U.S. Independence Day celebrations in Highland Park, Illinois, a northern suburb of Chicago. This latest shooting brings the number of mass shootings in the United States since the start of the year to far more than 200. I spoke to Cardinal Cupich, who shared in our interview his reaction to the tragedy and made an appeal for weapons of war to stay off the streets rather than be readily accessible and abused, and for a realization that money is driving this deadly phenomenon.
We have had so much violence, not only here in Chicagoland, but across the nation. Every day in the United States, for 300 people are shot and over 100 are killed each and every day. And also, 5 of those are children who die every day of gun violence. So I was just heartbroken that this visited our area once again, but also outraged that this continues to go unabated in our country.
And how would you describe the situation of violence in Chicago currently, and what is being done to combat it?
Well, this year, measures have been taken by law enforcement and civic officials so that the amount of gun violence is being addressed in a serious way. But they are hamstrung by the fact that we do not have sufficient laws in this country that allow for the restriction of especially high-powered weapons as the one that was used yesterday. There's no reason why we should not be able to allow people to possess and have access to bring into the streets weapons of war. And something has to change. There has to be, of course, due diligence with regard to safety procedures. But we also have to keep in mind that the right to bear arms in this country should allow for prudential judgment in interpreting the Second Amendment and to enact laws that take away these weapons of war from our streets. So until that is done, law enforcement, local law enforcement, and civic officials have a difficulty in curbing the violence even more so.
And there have been more than 200 mass shootings in the United States since the start of this year. Do you have an appeal to make in light of the scores of shootings taking place across the country?
Yes, of course, mass shootings depend on weapons of violence that have huge magazines of bullets in them, as the one used yesterday. My hope would be that there would be a way in which we would be able to make sure that these weapons of war cannot be in the hands of people on a daily basis. They belong in gun clubs. They should be locked up, used only at places at firing ranges and so on. There's no reason for them to be on our streets. And I think that this is part of the issue with regard to these 200 mass shootings in our country this year. We have to do something.
That was Cardinal Blaise Cupich, Archbishop of Chicago, speaking to me about the deadly 4th of July shootings in his archdiocese. In other international news, another terrible tragedy in the Mediterranean Sea, in which 22 migrants from Mali drowned just off the coast of Libya on Tuesday. Another 61 survivors, mostly from Mali, were rescued and taken to Libya. Speaking about the reality for those leaving West African nations so often, despite the enormous risks, is Father Patrick Edemaso, West Africa coordinator for the Jesuit Refugee Service. He told Francesca Merlot about the factors that push these young boys and girls to leave their countries, fully aware that they will risk their lives to cross the sea.
The situation that happened is supremely tragic. But I think what is important to note is the fact that these people who are traveling, these people who are migrating irregularly, as it were, not just normal people, you could say. These are sometimes just teenagers who see no hope at all in their circumstance. It is worth mentioning that the push and pull factor here varies. On the one hand, talking about the Sahel now, you have extremist violence on the one hand. You have poor governance as well, and just a constant change of government. There is climate change as well. So as it were, these are young people who feel there is no hope for them staying back home. So as a result, they would rather engage in this very perilous journey in the hopes of finding a better fortune in Europe. But sad as it is, a lot of them tend to die in the process and never arrive at their destination.
Now, in terms of the victims, what happens? Are their families informed?
In some instances, the ones I'm personally familiar with, the families to date are still awaiting, the return of their sons and daughters. In their assessment, if these kids have gone overseas and are probably alive and working somewhere. But in fact, some of these people, some of these young men and women have lost their lives, in transit, and nobody can technically account for them. So you find scenarios where some families are able to get knowledge, either directly through UN agencies or through other platforms or through friends with whom they travel. And there are also families who never hear a word about their loved ones who have engaged in these journeys and have unfortunately able to arrive to pass back a message to them back home. So it's to an extent, you would say it's a two-edged sword. There are those who are aware, and there are those who are simply not aware what has happened to their loved ones.
That was Father Patrick Atamaso of Jesuit Refugee Service. Another saddening story. Millions of children and their families are facing the worst food crisis in decades. Save the Children is calling for immediate action worldwide to save their lives and has allocated $28.5 million in funds to deal with the food emergency. Based on this report, Lisa Zangarini has the story.
The latest data available show that the number of people suffering from hunger in the world has more than doubled in 2 years, from 135 million to 276 million, reversing the progress achieved over the past decades. According to Gabriella Wyman, humanitarian director of Save the Children, the combined impact of conflicts, climate change, COVID-19 and inflated food prices as a result of the war in Ukraine has brought thousands of people to endure famine, and another 49 million could soon follow if they don't receive immediate support. Currently, 750,000 people are facing hunger conditions in 5 countries, including Ethiopia, Yemen, South Sudan, Afghanistan and Somalia, due to severe drought, which adds to the effects of conflicts, political instability and the pandemic. The war in Ukraine has disrupted the global food system, causing the prices of wheat and sunflower oil to skyrocket and exacerbating the serious food crisis in countries ranging from Afghanistan to Yemen, from the Horn of Africa to the Sahel region, where Save the Children is seeing a growing number of children with life-threatening levels of malnutrition. In the Horn of Africa, more and more families resort to desperate means to survive, such as drinking from cattle troughs, eating rotten meat, and fighting with wild animals for food. In response to the crisis, Save the Children said it has allocated the record sum of $28.5 million to 19 countries. At the same time, the humanitarian organization is calling for additional international funding. Together with governments, donors, partners and communities, said Wyman, we must change the course of this global crisis to create a safe and healthy world for our children. I am Lisa Zangarini.
That brings us to the end of this edition of Vatican and World News. For more on these and other stories, go to our web portal or visit our Twitter or Facebook pages. Many thanks to our sound engineer in the studio in the Vatican. I am Deborah Castellano-Lubov.
Laudetur Jesus Christus. Vatican and World.
The Church is in Africa, at the service of reconciliation, peace and justice. The Church is in Africa, at the service of reconciliation, peace and justice.
This is the Africa service of Vatican Radio.
Welcome to our half-hour daily program for Africa.
In this edition today, our bulletin of church news to be followed by Panorama. Today we shall close with our feature of health and healing. My name is Kanyanta Godfrey Kampamba. As has been announced earlier on this program, Pope Francis is taking his usual July break from most activities and the general audiences. The big exception to the Holy Father's rest for July will be his apostolic trip later in the month between 24th and 30th July to Canada, where he has a very full itinerary. In fact, on Wednesday, Pope Francis appointed Monsignor Philippe Coulbelieu to be the Undersecretary of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. And to his appointment, Monsignor Coulbelieu was a departmental head in the Dicastery of Culture and Education. Monsignor Coulbelieu was born on 13th August 1968 at Neuilly-sur-Seine in France and was ordained a priest for the Diocese of Toulouse on 30th April 1995. He holds a doctorate in dogmatic theology from Rome's Gregorian University. And in his Twitter message on Wednesday, the Holy Father spoke of the activity of God in our daily lives. Every day God passes by and sows a seed in the soil of our lives. Making that seed grow depends on us, on our prayer, and on the open heart with which we approach the scriptures, so that it might become for us the living word of God, tweeted the Holy Father. The Vatican on Wednesday published an interview granted by Pope Francis to Guillermo Marco, the Argentinian priest who was in charge of the press office of the Archdiocese of Buenos Aires while Bergoglio was Archbishop. The interview was recorded on 9th June and lasted an hour and a half and was published on Sunday, 3rd July in Marco tu Semana de la Tele a las Redes, a podcast produced by Father Marco in Argentina. Father Benedict Mayaki tells us more.
Describing himself, Pope Francis said, "My heart is a warehouse. It is full of things I keep. I have to expand the shelves all the time, and in this, I'm a bit of a collector in the good sense of the word, as I don't want to lose any of the good things that people give me." The Holy Father said these words in an interview granted to Argentinian priest Guillermo Marco on Sunday. Father Marco, who was in charge of the press office of the Archbishopric of Buenos Aires when Bergoglio was Archbishop, published part of the interview in Marco tu Semana de la Tele a las Redes, a podcast produced by the priest. The conversation focused on more personal questions about the Pope, his spiritual life, and his time away from his native Argentina. Talking about his life of prayer, the Pope noted that the prayer of a bishop is to take care of his flock, and the Pope is a bishop. Hence, his prayer is to ask for, to intercede, to give thanks for all the good that is done. Pope Francis also said that he wakes up early to pray because it is easy to get carried away when activities of the day begin. Reflecting on his life in Buenos Aires, Pope Francis recalled that he was always either walking or taking a bus. Here in Rome, rather, he said that the 2 times he tried to go out, he was noticed by people and even members of the press. Regarding his spiritual state before his mission at the head of the church, the Pope said that the Holy Spirit gives you many gifts, but no one ever talks about the things that make you numb. And sometimes you feel you are numb in the face of situations that should make you suffer greatly and make you move without missing the opportunity. Another topic discussed in the interview was crisis management. Pope Francis noted that one of the things he has learned is that we do not know how to manage crisis, even though crises are what make us grow. When you transform a crisis into conflict, you lose, the Pope said. Unity is greater than conflict, and in other words, conflict diminishes you. Finally, reflecting on the cycle of catechesis on the elderly, which Pope Francis began on the 23rd of February, Father Marco wanted to know how the Pope faces this stage of life. At this age, the Pope said, "I laugh at myself and move on." I'm Father Benedict Mayaki.
The Cardinal Secretary of State, Pietro Parolin, is in South Sudan, where he arrived on Tuesday morning for the second leg of the visit that has also taken him to the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the afternoon on Tuesday, Cardinal Parolin met with South Sudanese President Salva Kiir in the presidential palace before he subsequently met with First Vice President Riek Machar. The only necessary fight is the one for peace and development. It is a battle to be waged altogether. Peace and development are 2 things linked. Without peace, there is no development. And the absence of peace is a source of instability and dissatisfaction, said Cardinal Parolin during his meeting with the South Sudanese President Salva Kiir. The tone for the 30-minute meeting on Tuesday was set by the memory of the 2019 retreat at the Vatican, attended by the leaders of South Sudan, during which the Pope, in a shocking gesture, kissed their feet. During Paroline's meeting, the first thoughts naturally went to Pope Francis, his health, and his postponed visit to Africa. As in recent days in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Secretary of State reiterated the Pope's desire to visit as soon as conditions permit. I am confident of the Pope's visit, Salva Kiir said, assuring that the country is ready to support this important event and that all Christians of different denominations have united to pray for the Pope's speedy recovery. Cardinal Parolin also delivered a message from Pope Francis to the South Sudanese president and highlighted the Pope's recognition of the steps taken by the government in the 4 years since the retreat in the Vatican. But in his speech, the Secretary of State further insisted on other things to be done in order to ensure stability in the country, including implementing the revitalized peace agreement, which was begun by the country and is due to expire in February 2023. The Secretary of State also pointed out the path forward, particularly in view of next year's general elections, urging the country to promote national unity, stabilize the country, introduce constitutional reform, and encourage the drive for unity, which is necessary for the development of South Sudan. Save the Children is calling for global response to stop famine. The United Kingdom-based charity works at improving the lives of children through better education, healthcare, and economic opportunities, as well as providing emergency aid in natural disasters, war, and other conflicts. The humanitarian organization has allocated the record sum of $28.5 million United States dollars in order to deal with the current food crisis hitting several countries in the world, and is calling on governments and donors for funding, saying that the number of people suffering from hunger has more than doubled in 2 years. Lisa Zengarini has this report.
The latest data available show that the number of people suffering from hunger in the world has more than doubled in 2 years, from 135 million to 276 million, reversing the progress achieved over the past decades. According to Gabriella Wyman, humanitarian director of Save the Children, the combined impact of conflicts, climate change, COVID-19, and inflated food prices as a result of the war in Ukraine has brought thousands of people to endure famine, and another 49 million could soon follow if they don't receive immediate support. Currently, 750,000 people are facing hunger conditions in 5 countries, including Ethiopia, Yemen, South Sudan, Afghanistan, and Somalia, due to severe drought, which adds to the effects of conflicts, political instability, and the pandemic. The war in Ukraine has disrupted the global food system, causing the prices of wheat and sunflower oil to skyrocket and exacerbating the serious food crisis in countries ranging from Afghanistan to Yemen, from the Horn of Africa to the Sahel region, where Save the Children is seeing a growing number of children with life-threatening levels of malnutrition. In the Horn of Africa, more and more families resort to desperate means to survive, such as drinking from cattle troughs, eating rotten meat, and fighting with wild animals for food. In response to the crisis, Save the Children said it has allocated the record sum of $28.5 million to 19 countries. At the same time, the humanitarian organization is calling for additional international funding. Together with governments, donors, partners and communities, said Wyman, we must change the course of this global crisis to create a safe and healthy world for our children. I am Lisa Zengarini.
You are tuned to the Daily Africa service of Vatican Radio.
African News Panorama.
President Felix Tshisekedi of the Democratic Republic of Congo and his counterpart Paul Kagame of Rwanda are due to begin talks in the Angolan capital Luanda on Wednesday amid tensions over a surge of rebel attacks in eastern Congo. The two neighbors have traded accusations since the M23 rebel group began a major offensive in the border areas of eastern Congo at the end of March. The DRC accuses Rwanda of backing the M23 rebels. Kigali denies this and in turn accuses Kinshasa of fighting alongside another armed group that wants to seize power in Kigali. Both leaders have arrived in Luanda for the talks. Angolan President João Lourenço has been appointed by the African Union to mediate the talks and restore dialogue between the two parties. At least 600 inmates escaped in a jailbreak in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, on Tuesday night following an attack at the Kuje Maximum Prison by suspected Boko Haram militants. The permanent secretary of the Ministry of Interior said the very determined rebels attacked the prison with very high-grade explosives, killing one guard on duty. About 300 have been recaptured, authorities said. Staying in Nigeria, unidentified gunmen ambushed the advance convoy of Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari on Tuesday in the northern state of Katsina, injuring 2 people, a spokesman for the presidency said in a statement. Mr. Buhari was not in the convoy of cars carrying an advance team of security guards, protocol and media officers heading to the president's hometown of Daura to prepare for the Muslim Eid al-Adha holiday. The attack on the convoy highlights the ongoing security challenges the country is facing, particularly in the northern regions where armed gangs are rife. A bill to regulate the harvesting and trade in human organs and tissues has been introduced in Uganda's parliament in a move to curb a growing illegal market in body parts in the country. The proposed legislation, the first such for Uganda, seeks to regulate all activities around donation and transplant of organs and tissues, and also prescribes punishment for a range of violations. There has been a public outcry in Uganda over the trade in organs such as kidneys and tissues derived from unwilling donors. According to local media reports, Ugandan women recruited for domestic work in the Middle East are sometimes duped into taking medical procedures in which their kidneys are harvested against their will. Some hospitals, including public ones, have also been involved in the illicit trade, media reports have said. And Sudan's military leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has issued a decree relieving the 5 civilian members of the Sovereign Council from their duties. A statement on the council's Telegram account said on Wednesday. General Burhan said on Monday the army will not participate in internationally led dialogue efforts to break its stalemate with the civilian opposition. Instead, he urged political and revolutionary groups to start talks to form a transitional government. You are tuned to the Africa service of Vatican Radio.
And now, our feature, Health and Healing. Pediatric researchers have expressed concern about the increase in the number of children and adolescents who suffer from obesity. Obesity is simply defined as abnormal or excessive fat accumulation in the body that leads to overweight that becomes a risk to your health. In the past, obesity was associated with high-income countries where people were rich and therefore spent much on consuming goods and services. In poor countries, overweight was then perceived as positive because people who were obese were thought to have much money. Indeed, some people sought to become overweight so that they could be thought of as rich. In East Africa, for example, such people were referred to as mafuta mingi, that is, the rich with a lot of fats. In recent years, however, medical experts have carried out research which has put obesity in negative light because of its consequences on our health. According to research, obese people are more likely to suffer heart disease and stroke, high blood pressure, diabetes, some cancers, gallbladder disease and gallstones, a degenerative joint disease known as osteoarthritis, a type of arthritis known as gout that causes severe joint pain, breathing problems such as sleep apnea, when a person stops breathing for short periods during sleep, and asthma. Professor Louise Bauer is an Australian pediatrician and a researcher with interest in childhood obesity. She has published a number of works on this topic. She explains the burden of obesity among children and adolescents in the world.
The prevalence of obesity in children and young people has really increased quite dramatically over the past few decades. If we think about 1975, then the prevalence of obesity in girls was about 0.7%, and for boys was about 0.9%, not very high. Just a few years ago, in 2016, we're looking at prevalence rates of 5.6% in girls and 7.8% in boys. So this has been a really big rise. And of course, in a number of countries, it's far, far more prevalent. So we're looking at prevalence rates greater than 30%. So almost about 1 in 3 children and young people with obesity in many Pacific nations. And we have values greater than 20% in several countries in the Middle East, in North Africa, in parts of the Western Pacific, the Caribbean, as well as the USA. So it's a major, major issue in many countries. And it's not just in high-income countries, but in many small island developing states and low and middle-income countries.
There is no single cause for obesity. Professor Bauer analyzes the interacting factors that contribute to obesity among children and adolescents.
There's a whole array of intricately connected factors. So first of all, you have to be biologically predisposed. We know there's a very strong genetic predisposition, one of the reasons it runs in families. But we also have a range of socioeconomic factors that can also influence that. And we have a range of environmental factors that have really made it difficult for those who are particularly biologically predisposed to stay in a healthy weight range. What we see is a physiological response to what I see as a pathological environment known as the 21st century. There's no one thing that's gone wrong, and so no one thing is going to fix it. And we see that the issues to do with sedentarism, the decrease in active transport, the rise of passive entertainment, huge changes in our food environments across many, many different parts of the world. The rise of food marketing, different types of food eaten now than a couple of generations ago. And also people living in stress, and in high-income countries, those who are living in more social disadvantage are particularly at risk. So it's a perfect storm of problems that have emerged.
Obesity is now considered by medical doctors as a disorder or an illness. The question, however, is how it can be treated or managed in young people without provoking resistance from them.
One of the really important things in those who have obesity is being treated without stigma in the health system. So one of the really important things is to have good treatment from health professionals, whether it's a nurse, a doctor, an allied health professional, who treat people with respect and care for them and support them so that they feel that they have a sense of self-efficacy, that they feel they can come again, that they don't feel that they're being blamed for their illness. So I think that's really important. I think it's very important for health professionals to assess the whole child, the whole young person, take a good examination history to better understand what the aspects that are there that may be contributing to this young person's issue. In terms of treatment, we would strongly advocate a whole of family approach. We need broader family engagement to do this. We're not just talking about weight being the outcome. We're talking about having good nutritional intake, living a healthy, physically active life, all of those things that make for good general health. It's really important to take a developmentally sensitive approach. So the way that, as a clinician, I would treat a 4-year-old is different from the way I would treat a 14-year-old, and to be very sensitive to those issues. I think it's important that clinicians manage any obesity-associated complications to recognise them. So if this young person has prediabetes or obstructive sleep apnea or has hip or knee problems that haven't been addressed, then those definitely need to be treated. But then it's also important to address the issue to do with weight. If this young person is seeking treatment, and the family too, then it's very important to do so in a very sensitive, helpful way. We would recommend that we have a whole of family approach. We would look at support for long-term behavioural change, and that deals with moving in terms of dietary intake, looking at sedentary behaviours and looking at opportunities for physical activity. And that that's for everybody, no matter the severity of disease. In adolescents and those who have more severe disease, then there are other treatment options such as more intensive dietary interventions, some pharmacotherapy, but although not as much available now as we would like, and also bariatric surgery in those with more severe disease. All of these are part of the suite of options that we would have. Just to really emphasise the importance of doing this in a collaborative fashion with the young person, the child and the family, and about having this non-stigmatising approach. What we want to do is to allow people to feel free to be able to come back again and to engage in treatment in a way that's going to support them. We don't want them feeling scarred by this interaction with the health system.
Obese patients have often complained that they encounter barriers in their attempts to access treatment. Professor Bawa explains what these barriers are and how they can be overcome.
The very fact that there aren't many places where people who need treatment for obesity can actually get it in a publicly accessible and age-appropriate fashion. We know from a study of 68 countries that the World Obesity Federation did that in every country that was audited, surveyed, clinicians recognised that there were generally long waiting lists to access treatment, that there may not be health professionals who are well trained in management, that it might be expensive to access the treatment that's needed, and that they might experience stigma. This is well recognised, and I think many clinicians working in this area also have this sense of frustration. So that's one of the barriers. There are also barriers to do with individuals. For example, if the family live with social disadvantage, then it's important that clinicians be aware of the challenges that there may be and give advice that's appropriate to people who may be living in relative poverty in terms of food choices, opportunities for physical activity. If a young person, for example, has a developmental disability or other chronic disease, that needs to be taken into account in terms of the advice and treatment options given. If someone is having significant family crisis or has psychiatric issues that are present, then those may well need to be treated and addressed before weight management can occur. But obesity itself, even if all those issues are fairly taken off the table, then there are barriers. The young person may not want to be involved in treatment at that time. You need to be certain as a health professional that you're not treating yourself. I may be worried about this young person's liver function tests or their blood glucose, but they may be worried about something completely different. They may be worried, for example, about keeping up with their mates on the soccer field or being bullied at school. And it would be foolish of me to go down the path of this very medical model approach if I don't address the issues that are really important to that young person. So we need to see what are the factors for them that are important. So it may be addressing issues to do with bullying and self-esteem and giving support in that way. It may be, in the case of a young person who wants to be fit to go on the soccer field, to actually think about whether you may need to involve, for example, an exercise scientist, or actually use the concept of getting match fit and improving fitness as the way in. The weight on the scales may be important to many of us, but it may not be the important thing for that young person. Young people may experience a range of other barriers. For example, if they've been stigmatised about their weight, then they may expect to be stigmatised again in the interactions with you, and hence the importance of being able to take an approach that stops that stigma. It means that the therapeutic interaction you have with them will be far better, and they'll be more likely to see that health professionals can help in the future as well. But of course, there will be barriers. Not everybody responds exactly the same way to the same form of therapy, and why we need to look forward in the future to more forms of personalised pathways in terms of obesity management. We're only at the very start of understanding what forms of treatment may best work for which people at which time. And we have a long way to go there.
That was Professor Louise Bawa, an Australian pediatrician and a renowned researcher in childhood obesity. And that was Health and Healing for this week. You have been listening to the English Africa service of Vatican Radio, and I am John